Hi, everyone, and welcome to today's Spiceworks Partner Webinar, brought to you by Veeam. Today's topic is Protect Your Small Business Against These Top 3 Threats. But before we start today's presentation, I did want to take you all through the console widgets on your screen. To the left of slides, you'll not only see the speaker bio, where you can learn a little more about today's presenter, but below that, you'll also find some handouts that Veeam was so nice to provide. So make sure to click through those and check those out. As we move around the slide window there, you'll see Q&A to the bottom. Feel free to get your questions in throughout the presentation, and our presenter will be answering them in the Q&A portion just a little bit later. And then over to the right of the slides window, you'll see the chat. Feel free to pop that open if you haven't already. Say hello to everyone in there attending today. But just a quick reminder that this chat does follow the Spiceworks community guidelines. And with that, chat is optional, so feel free to close that out if you prefer. And finally, I did want to remind you all that we will be giving away a Regner Patriot Rolling Business Set to one lucky attendee who is in attendance today. So we'll be announcing that winner at the end of today's webinar, so make sure to stick around to the very end for that. Well, that's all I have, so without any further ado, I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Noah Gamache, a systems engineer with Veeam. Welcome, Noah.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Matt. I appreciate it. And thank you, everybody, for attending. We do appreciate your time today. So today's webinar, we're discussing protect your small business against these top 3 threats. Right? So we'll actually kind of get into the nitty-gritty of it, define the top 3 threats, then we're going to talk about how Veeam can help. Right? My name is Noah Gamache. I'm an inside systems engineer with Veeam. Let's go ahead and jump right in here. Agenda. So we're going to first define kind of the business landscape, and then we're going to talk about understanding threats, the top 3 threats, disaster protection, and then questions. And if you have questions throughout, please feel free to go ahead and throw those in the question box. That's actually something I maybe should have addressed already. Feel free to throw those out at any time. Usually I'll maybe try to answer them on the fly, or maybe wait till we get to a certain section and then answer them then. I usually don't like to have a super long list before we get to the end, so we'll try to kind of burn through those as we go here. Anyways, moving on. Let's talk about the business landscape. So the internet has changed business forever. Even the smallest business has tools that are undreamed of 10 years ago. Some of these would include marketing and advertisement. So if you think about it, your web page is now your storefront, right? It's your 24/7, 365 access to your business, your information, your supply chain management has completely changed. Order processing and fulfillment is really all done online now as well, maybe through some type of web portal or something like that. Business productivity and communications has completely changed and really does depend on the internet as well. Right, you think about email, voice over IP for telephones, things like that, right? Welcome to the dark side, right? A lot of times these changes are very positive, right? We can move a lot quicker. We're a lot faster as far as response time. A lot of our businesses are now 24/7, 365 because of the advent of the internet. But there are significant new threats that come with this new kind of opportunity as well. Right? So we get kind of the good and the bad, right? The first of those being ransomware, right? Something like a crypto locker or a WannaCry that's going to take your data, scramble it up, and then charge you a fee, right? And you have to pay to get that data unscrambled. Targeted phishing and financial type attacks, right? So those emails with maybe a malicious link or a malicious attachment, maybe something you need to download, that could then infect your environment. Data loss and breach, right? So this could also maybe fall under the phishing kind of umbrella there, or maybe just kind of the classic example of forgetting to save your work, right? Save your paper the night before you're going to print it, right? And it's due or something like that. And then downtime, right? Lack of service availability, right? So if your customers can no longer get to your website, they're immediately going to turn around and look for that other business that is truly 24/7, right? These are kind of in addition to traditional risks, like things you would normally have in an age without the internet, right? There have always been fires and tornadoes and hurricanes and earthquakes and burglary, right? But with the advent of the internet, we now have these kind of new risks as well. So let's kind of define disaster, right? So disaster to a small business means sustained loss of revenue, right? So anything that's going to keep stop the income, right? And we can maybe talk about some potential causes as well. So failure of SPOFS, single point of failures, right? So maybe you just have one particular component in your environment. If that component goes down, your entire environment is now down, right? And the income is stopped. Unavailability of key systems. This could definitely fall into the single point of failures piece. Theft and embezzlement, right? So people directly taking money just away from your business, right? Reputational damage. So not only is your website down, right? If we want to call that the disaster, that's also going to do damage to your reputation as well, right? People are going to look at you in a little bit of a different light, right? Because when you think about it, all businesses, and this is kind of another side of it, everything is all about customer reviews now, right? So if your business is down or your image is hurt, it's suddenly all online as well. And then, of course, physical damage. Let's actually talk about the top 3 disasters and kind of lay those out here. Number 1, irreversible data loss. So when the data you need to run your business is gone, so is the business, right? Your data is your business. Data is integral, right, to the business itself. Primary threats within this: ransomware and cryptoware, right? Physical loss or damage, logical corruption of live or backup data. All these threats have in common that you lose your original data, and either you don't have the backups, or what happened to your original also happened to the backups. Because when we talk about this, there are really 2 types of data being discussed here. Production, right, what's actually running live in your environment that your end users depend on every single day, and then your backups, right, a copy of that, a secondary kind of fail-safe, right, or fallback that you're going to be able to lean on when you need. These types of attacks could, be one or the other or a mix of both, right? It could be attacking either types of data there. A second threat would be a financial disaster, right? So when an attacker actually gets your money in some type of way, right? And primary threats here would be credential stealing malware. So when we think about it, even just getting like your administrator login, right, for a couple of your machines in your environment, you could have sensitive financial information on those machines, right? Spear phishing and supplier fraud as well. These disasters are not directly technology related at all times. Here at the bottom we're talking about in the old days, bank fraud and employee embezzlement were the vectors here. Now the internet means attacks can come from anywhere, but the attacks themselves still involve familiar banking systems, right? So financial disasters would be kind of the second one here. And then the third, physical destruction or damage, right? You can't run your business if you lose any of the following: your place of business, so the actual physical location itself, any equipment that you use to operate your business, so maybe the actual hardware, your servers, your storage, things like that, your employees themselves. And then primary threats here are going to be natural disasters, fire, burglary, and theft here. So let's talk about the protection side, right, and how we can help maybe alleviate some of these issues, avoid these issues, maybe take a proactive approach as well here to avoid some of these top disasters. What did all 3 of these have in common? So you're losing access to data, services, or equipment, right? And when we think about the top 3 disasters themselves, they do come down to the actual data and information itself, the services, right, or the equipment, right, the physical hardware. Any of these would mean a crippling loss of revenue, right? That internal income itself is now cut down, right? And all of these can be mitigated by technical protections, right? So, and that's emboldened there because we're Veeam, right? We're talking about maybe backing up, replicating, and getting other copies of this data so you can mitigate and protect yourself against these 3 disasters. protection number one, right? The very first thing you can do if you're not doing it already is backing up that data. Backups are like flossing, right? We all know we need to. Most of us don't, or most of us do, but maybe we don't test, right? Or maybe we back up and never verify or ensure that they're working efficiently. It's kind of something that's just sitting in the back of our mind. I also compare this to maybe doing routine maintenance on your car or your automobile, right? You're going to want to maintain that machine over time. If you don't, it's eventually going to degrade, and you're going to be in hot water, right, when your car breaks down on the highway or something like that. Same thing with your teeth, right? Kind of the phrase I think about with this is that a good smile never goes out of style, right? Your backups need to be three things, right? When we talk about actually backing up that data, so verified. If you don't verify them, then what's the point, right? And we'll talk verification later on here, but within Veeam, we do have ways to automatically verify your backups. A lot of the times I'll talk with customers or potential customers who manually test as well, which is perfectly fine. Your backups need to be complete, right? And when I say complete and when we talk about backing up all of this data, this, I think, depends from business to business on what you define complete backups as, because you may not need to back up every single machine in your environment, right? You definitely don't have to by any means, right? It really kind of varies from business to business. Logically isolated, so backing up to local storage is not sufficient. And this kind of comes back to this 3-2-1 rule we always talk about, but we always advise having a secondary copy of your data at a second site, right? And we did have a pretty good question. It's right on topic here. We're asking, what is the best way to test your Veeam backups? So within Veeam, we have something called a sure backup job and or a sure replica job. These are fantastic ways to test your backups. I believe I get more into the actual nitty-gritty of what those tests do. Really, the short answer for now is that we can do sure backup and sure replica to verify those backups and replicas for you. Protection number two, redundancy, right? So the Navy SEAL rule, 2 is 1 to 1 is none, right? So what I always talk about with redundancy and think about with this is that for your most critical data, you're going to want as many different as many different backups or copies of that data as you can possibly afford, right, or as you can store. And that means maybe writing an initial backup that's local, a secondary backup off-site to another disk target, to a cloud or something like that, maybe even writing backups to tape and having those shipped off as well, and then another, maybe replication or DR as well, right? I think having as many different copies of that data is going to be very important, right? Because when you think about it, say your production goes down, right, and that's kind of copy 1. You then try to recover from copy 2, which is your initial backup. Maybe that doesn't work. Then you go to backup number 3, and that does, right? Or maybe it doesn't, right? And you would hope that you'd have a fourth. When I think about this, I just like to think that you want as many different options spanning, different time frames that you're going to be able to recover from. So when we talk about multiple kind of backup generations or maybe phases, right, because we have different jobs within Veeam, like a backup copy, replication, to ensure that you, or even backup to tape, to ensure that you can kind of achieve that redundancy there. And then thinking about it geographically, right, say a hurricane or a tornado or a fire or something actually kind of happens within your immediate area, you're going to want to have that data stored in separate geographical locations, and you would maybe need to determine how far away that data needs to sit, right? Do I need to have that data 200 miles away or 2,000 miles away, right, or something like that? And then redundancy for your critical single points of failures there. We have a great question. Do you recommend the 3-2-1 backup strategy? And yes, I absolutely do recommend the 3-2-1 backup strategy. That says that you want 3 copies of your data, so 1 in production, 1 as an initial backup, and then a third kind of as an off-site. 2 separate media types, so an example I always use is 1 backup on disk and then maybe 1 on tape. sometimes I kind of bend the two media types to maybe think one backup on a Windows-based repository and then another on Linux, right? Or maybe like a dedupe appliance or something that's running just a different OS, even if it is technically a disk. And then one copy of your backups off-site as well. So yes, I absolutely suggest the 3-2-1 backup strategy or rule, right, or philosophy, however you want to call it. It's a great question there as well. Protection number 3, so more protection. So this is maybe outside of the scope of backup traditionally, but very important things to think about would be anti-malware and software, as well as firewall equipment you can afford, kind of within your budget that's going to help filter out that data within your environment, right? It's sometimes better to skimp on desktops or laptops or even internet service to have better protection within your environment and pay what it takes to have it properly configured and maintained. And right kind of feeding into that would be staying on top of your patches and your updates, right? Because if you're updating your machines consistently over time, Windows and the other kind of vendors out there, they're going to stay on top of what's current as far as security threats and things of that nature. Same thing for Veeam, right? You can always stay on top of your Veeam updates and patches as well. Protection number 4 is knowledge, right? So knowledge is power, right? Knowing how to recover from a disaster, and I think we asked some pretty good questions here. So in this hypothetical situation, where are your employees and how are you going to be able to contact them, right? Where is your data sitting, and where are your backups specifically? And we talked a lot about this with kind of the geographical side of things. What would you have to do to restart operations in a new location or with new equipment? Right, so say your building is no longer there, what are you going to do and how are you going to do it? Are there any critical skills or people that you can't replace? Thinking about this knowledge piece and all of these kind of pointed questions here, I like to think of the scenario that you might want to walk through with your own business is that we are now in disaster mode, right? And maybe just play that situation out and actually test recovering and maybe failing over to a DR site, right, or over to the cloud, or recovering, an individual machine. When I think about this, I always like to start small when actually doing testing of backups and DR and that kind of thing. So just start with, okay, one individual machine went down, what are we going to do to recover? And then kind of slowly scope that out from there until you know what to do if your whole environment goes down, right? Let's switch gears a little bit. So we're now going to talk a little bit about what Veeam offers. And we actually had a question about the Office 365 piece there, which we'll get to. We have a whole section based on that, so bear with me till we get to your question there. But we're going to be talking about Veeam Backup Essentials, our Veeam agents for Windows and Linux, and then Veeam Backup for Office 365. Veeam Backup Essentials is our backup and replication product packaged with Veeam 1, right? So it's our backup and replication, the ability to create backup files and replica VMs packaged with our Veeam 1 solution, which is monitoring, reporting, capacity planning for your virtual environment as well as for backup and replication. So think real-time monitoring and then reporting as well. And then our Veeam agents, right? So these are kind of traditional agents that were used for backup. We don't suggest using these for your VMs typically, but these can be used for your physical Windows and Linux desktops, laptops, and servers within your environment. And then Veeam Backup for O365. This product is designed to run on Windows, and what it does is it will back up on-premise Exchange. It will also back up Exchange that's living in O365, and it can pull those backups into kind of the location of your choice depending on where you install it. And I'm going to get more into that in just a little bit. We actually do SharePoint and OneDrive with that as well as of last week, so now we can back up Exchange, SharePoint, and OneDrive with that product. So let's get back to the ways to verify or ensure that you are protected against the top 3 disasters. So let's talk about backups that are complete. VMware and Hyper-V backup job creation. The reason I include this slide here showing just a little bit of us editing a backup job itself is to show you that you're adding in the entire virtual machine itself within your VM-based backup jobs, right? So again, we back up the entire machine based on a VMware or a Hyper-V snapshot, right? And then we create a backup file from that, and we give you quick recoveries. Notably here would be instant VM recovery to recover a full virtual machine from that backup. Of course, we'll give you granular recovery options as well, be that maybe an individual file or an application item. But I chose this kind of image and this idea that we do the full VM-based backup to show that backups with Veeam are truly complete, right? For the physical side, we can back up the full machines as well, right? So keep that in mind. And that actually goes right into my next slide here. With our Veeam agents, we have what's called recovery media. This is essentially bootable media that you can do a bare metal recovery from physical to physical machine, right? Say your laptop desktop server goes down, you want to plug in a USB stick on your brand new server or maybe an existing one and do the recovery to that new bare metal machine. This recovery media allows you to do so. With the agent, you also have the ability to recover to a virtual machine. In Hyper-V, you can do instant VM recovery. In VMware, you can mount the physical machine backup to an existing VM as well. We actually have a question that kind of pertains to this as well. So with the 3-2-1 rule in regards to SMB owners who only use laptops for business, would said laptop be one of the components of 3-2-1 backup? I think yes, because, and the kind of the key thing I want to zoom in on here is you're saying we only use laptops for business, right? So if that laptop itself is integral to your business itself, then yes. It kind of depends though, right? It depends on where you're storing your actual data. If maybe you're just doing everything online and saving it all to some kind of cloud, maybe like iCloud or your Google Drive or something like, or something like that, then you might be. It might depend, right? If you have data local to the laptops themselves, I'd say absolutely yes. Just kind of depending on what they're actually doing. With Veeam, you want backups that are verified, right? So that are tested, that are going to work correctly. First, I wanted to define our instant VM recovery here, and then we'll get in really to that question that was asked earlier about the best way to test your Veeam backups. So with Veeam, you create a backup file, right? That's a compressed, deduplicated backup file, and it's sitting on your storage, right? So it's sitting on whatever disk-based storage you choose to use. Be that a NAS or a SAN or some kind of direct attach or something internal to Windows, it's up to you, right, as far as where that backup lives. At the end of the day, it's a crunched down file sitting on kind of a dummy disk, right? With Veeam, say a virtual machine goes down, you then have the capability to run directly from that compressed and deduped backup file. That first kind of step there, that's called our vPower NFS. It's going to get you up and running straight from the backup itself, and that new VM will be presented to your hypervisor, and you're going to be able to continue working very quickly. This is a two-step process, right? So you do the instant VM recovery, you run straight from the backup itself, and then as kind of a secondary step, you migrate back online when you're kind of ready, right? It is like a two-step piece there. Now that we've kind of defined this instant VM recovery, let's talk about verified protection and leveraging that backup data. So if we remember, we take our backup file, present it to our hypervisor, run straight from the backup itself. With Sure Backup and Sure Replica, we're going to utilize what's called a virtual lab, which is really just a little bit of space you've carved out within your hypervisor to allow us to do testing, right? So we're going to take that backup, present it to the hypervisor, and then spin up the VMs inside of the virtual lab, and then we're going to do automated testing against those. So a ping test, a heartbeat test, maybe any custom scripts that you've decided to throw in there, and then we're going to email you a report telling you what happened. This is, in my opinion, one of the best ways to test your backups because it happens automatically. You don't need to go into Veeam and hit test now once a week or however often. These jobs are going to run on their own schedule. It emails you a report telling you what happened, whether it passed the individual tests that you've put in there, and then you can go back into Veeam and maybe do an active full backup or something if you need to, right? The other kind of neat thing about this is, well, of course, this is kind of showing that we're doing the tests here, but the other neat thing about this is you can test your backup or your replica inside of the lab and then let that VM continue running. So imagine our VM running off of our backup, sitting in the lab. We can then console into the lab and do tests, right? Manual tests. So if you want to go in and maybe open up that particular program and make sure it's going to work correctly, you can. You can also go in, maybe do a patch or an update, right, that you have coming up that's going to hit production, but maybe we want to run it in the lab first, right? Run it in this isolated space. You absolutely can. So just something to keep in mind there is that you can always use this kind of as a testing ground as well. The second thing, or another thing we kind of talked about, are having backups that are logically isolated. Air gap, and I really like this picture. You can see the kind of different hot air balloons here, and they're not touching the ground, right? They are truly disconnected from production. When we advise having air gap backups, that's because nothing can touch them, right? There's a space between production, between kind of our main network, or kind of the source side here, and where these backups are sitting. A great way to achieve this would be backing up to tape, right? I know it's kind of considered legacy at times, but tape can be extremely useful for this air gap piece here. Or maybe backing up to an external drive and unplugging that external drive from your machine. With this, you have to think about the storage itself and how much that's going to cost, of course, right, as with any backup. But this is going to be removed, right? It's not going to be able to be touched by any kind of ransomware or anything like that. Let's talk about redundancy even more. And we actually have a dedicated 3-2-1 slide, right? And I do appreciate the questions so far about that, guys. Let's go ahead and define this again really quickly. I already did define it once, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this again here. If you guys have questions, please feel free to throw them in the box. But again, the 3-2-1 rule states that you need 3 copies of your data, right? So 1 in production, 1 on your backup storage, and then a 3rd copy offsite traditionally. 2 separate media types, so 1 backup on disk and maybe another on tape, or on a disk but with some other type of OS there. 1 copy of that data offsite, so one that is physically separate from production here. Let's talk about kind of the job to get you there. So within Veeam, we have traditional backup job, right? That's going to just create our backup local to our source side, and then we have backup copy. Within this job, we're essentially telling Veeam, scan my backup storage. If there are new backup files there, create a copy of that new data and shoot that off maybe to my second site or off to the cloud or something like that. Backup copy is really kind of in the background only, right? If you think about it, it's not touching production, so it's not touching VMware or Hyper-V or the physical machines being backed up by the agents. It's really just touching the backups themselves, scanning those, and then pushing a copy off to the secondary site. It's a very kind of efficient process for just getting the backups off-site there. Something I like to mention here is that backup copy is possible. You can set it up for the VMs or the physical machines in your environment. So maybe we're talking about that environment with a lot of laptops only. If you decide to back up to some kind of disk-based storage in your environment, you can then pick those initial backups up with the backup copy and push those off to your second kind of storage as well. And then there's replication. And with this job, you're creating a clone or a replica VM on a like hypervisor. So again, the end result of this is a virtual machine. We are not creating a file. We're creating a living, breathing VM, fully hydrated, taking up just as much space at the second site as what we have in production. This job, really the biggest difference with it is that you're targeting a host, right? So a server doing the virtualization role at your other site, right? Or maybe on just another host. So if we're in Hyper-V, that's a Hyper-V machine to another Hyper-V machine. If we're in VMware, that's an ESXi host, from one ESXi host to another ESXi host. We do offer some options with this, so things like replica seeding, network remapping, and re-IP. So if you are kind of targeting a DR side, you have those options. With these replica VMs, they sit powered off at the DR side. You can choose to power them on when you want. With the job, you're really creating restore points and then just pushing those over to the DR side. A restore point is comparable to a snapshot, right, within your hypervisor. And you choose how many of those you want. This job runs similar to a forever forward incremental, meaning that the first run is a full, right, creating the VM on the other side, and then every subsequent run is going to be incremental by default there. Let's talk about more protection. So there are a list of antivirus exclusions that you can set up within backup and replication to make sure we're not butting heads with your antivirus software. I strongly encourage you guys to kind of look out for those as well. Then we have firewall. There's an extensive list of use ports, or maybe not extensive, depending on your environment and what you're doing, that Veeam is going to use. You're going to want to make sure you open those up as well. Patches and updates, and this comes back to ensuring that you truly are fully protected, right? You have backups that are complete. You also want to make sure production is up to date, right? And that your patches and updates are you are up to date. This kind of comes back on that virtual lab side a little bit, ensuring that you do want to ensure your backups are verified as well, and then maybe test out your patches and updates in the virtual lab before ever touching back or putting those into production. Let's talk about the knowledge side of things, right? So we talked about creating our backups, verifying that they're working. We talked about kind of additional things that need to be kept in mind when looking at the backup and the production environment. So let's talk a little bit about Veeam 1, Veeam Management Pack, and Veeam Availability Orchestrator. And then I saw a couple more questions that I'll go ahead and answer as well. So let's talk Veeam 1 first. Veeam 1 is packaged with backup and replication in our Essentials product. This product, Veeam 1, can really help answer the question, where is your data located? Because this does real-time monitoring for VMware and Hyper-V. So it's going to scan your vCenter or your SCVMM down to the site, to the cluster, to the individual hosts, and then all the way down to the individual VMs, doing real-time monitoring of the different events happening on your VMs, the processes, and then kind of up through every piece of your environment there. There are a lot of alarms. I think it's something like 200 plus different alarms that are offered with Veeam 1. They're all customizable, right? So you can only be alerted on the things you truly care about. If an alarm goes off, you can click into the alarm itself, see knowledge on what is actually happening, receive a cause and a resolutions as well, and then outside articles to ensure that you can kind of troubleshoot and navigate that from there. With this, there is also a reporter side. So I mentioned that earlier, which can just automatically generate reports for you that could be emailed out or maybe saved to a particular folder that you could access at your leisure there as well. Next, we have Management Pack. Management Pack does overlap a little bit with the Veeam 1 product. This is for users of System Center Operations Manager, right? Because it's a management pack for that. This can help monitor all things virtualization As similarly to Veeam 1, it also provides a reporter side as well. If you're a System Center Operations Manager user, Management Pack is a great option because we really hook into the agents that they use on their side to help do our own monitoring and things of that nature as well. And I like this image here, this protected VMs report that we're currently looking at. This report helps answer the question of where are your backups, right? And how many of them do you have? Did my backups pass or fail on the last run? That kind of thing. This is a report that's automatically generated and pushed out, or you can just generate it on the fly kind of as needed. Really great if you're auditing your environment, just trying to see how many VMs you've actually backed up, how many restore points you have per machine. The view we're looking at here is really a kind of a zoomed-in view of a kind of VM by VM breakdown of the environment. We also have a view, right above this on the report that would show your totals for your whole environment, right? For example, I have 50 VMs, 40 of them have been backed up, 10 of them have been not, that type of thing there. Management Pack can also answer the question of where are your backups. I chose this screen grab just because it's showing a kind of infrastructure view here. I just kind of liked it, just showing where our different Veeam components are and things of that nature here. And lastly, I just did a quick screen grab of our Veeam Availability Orchestrator. This product is very useful if you're using Veeam replication and you want added failover functionality. So this provides better testing for your failover plans, right, when you're in disaster mode and that kind of thing. It does a lot more as far as reporting, helping to ensure that you're going to be ready in the case of a disaster. This is one of our newer products at Veeam. We're in version 1 of it, and it's improving over time here as we've made some announcements as to features coming out in the future and things like that. Those are all the slides I have, guys. I did see a couple questions that I was not able to answer on the fly, so I'm going to go ahead and just answer these kind of out loud here. So I talked a bit about the Office 365 product. Specifically, one of our users here asked, is this cloud-based? How do you sell this to your exec team? And that's kind of two separate questions, so we'll address those as two parts. The first part of this, Veeam Backup for O365, is this cloud-based? Or maybe it could be construed a few different ways. The first part is you can install our product itself into a cloud of your choice. So if you want to install it in Azure or AWS on a Windows VM there, you absolutely could. Or if you want to use a Veeam Cloud and Service provider, they can offer this for you as well. The other way I can maybe construe the first part is that Veeam Backup or Office 365 itself is a cloud service, right? This is not your environment. It's not your infrastructure. It's all living up in Microsoft's data centers. And, of course, that's part of it, right? That's part of the name. It's O365 because it's available every single day, 24/7, 365 kind of deal there. With that, how do you sell that to the executive team? How do you sell this product? At the end of the day, it's your data and it's your responsibility. Microsoft is responsible for the infrastructure itself, right? So the physical hardware housing the data, but the actual data is yours. A big two things I always talk about and like to mention with this. Deleted items out of Office 365 are permanently deleted by Microsoft after 2 weeks. So again, permanently deleted items are gone forever, right after 2 weeks. Same thing with your spam folder. Actually, I think it's a month for the spam folder. But either way, if something goes to spam, you don't realize for 2 weeks or a month, that data is gone forever. There is no recovering it ever. Forever and ever, amen. Those two reasons alone would be, I think, important to look into this. The other kind of main thing is that it's your data, right? You can't call Microsoft and say, hey, I can't access this email, or something happened, right? I had some kind of corruption or something like that. Microsoft isn't going to help right? Because it is your responsibility at the end of the day. Other questions I saw here. So one of our end users was asking for really, I think, kind of a comparison of the free version of backup and replication versus the paid. Well, there are free versions of a lot of our products, right? So when we say the free version of Veeam, we'll talk backup and replication first. There is a free version. You can go and download it right now. You could add in your VMware or Hyper-V environment and do some backups with it. The biggest number one limitation of backup and replication free is that it does not allow for a schedule. So every time you want to back up, you need to manually go in with your mouse, click on your machine you want to back up, and hit Veeam zip, right? Zip that backup up and create a full backup for me immediately, right? It's great for one-off backups, but what happens when you don't want to manually go in and hit backup now, right? It's never going to do that. The other thing that comes with that is it's full backups only, right? So if you're backing up every day, you do not want to create a full backup every day, right? So even just the lowest version of backup and replication, which is standard, provides for the ability to do scheduling as well as incremental backups. You're also missing out on replication, which is the second half of the name, right? You get just backup but no replication with Veeam Backup Free. If we're talking agents, there is a free version or are free versions of the agents as well. The free versus the paid, one of the big things with that is with the free version, you do have support from Veeam, and this goes for any of the free products, but it's very basic support, right? Anybody that's paid for Veeam is going to have higher SLA or quicker response time, right? Quicker resolution time on any tickets you open up with our support team, which is very important once we get into kind of production environments, right? You could install the free agent and set up those jobs on individual physical machines, as needed. Of course, we'd suggest using the paid version. The other kind of big thing you get with a paid version of the agent is the ability to manage your backup your backup jobs for those agents within backup and replication, right? So if you want a central machine in your environment to manage all of your agent jobs, you're going to need to have a paid version of the agent. There's a workstation and server version. If you have further questions, I'm more than happy to kind of get into it further there. And then the last question I'm seeing here, if we have Veeam replication, do we need Veeam 1? Okay, I'm assuming it's if we have backup and replication, do we need Veeam 1? Absolutely depends on your need, kind of from business to business, right? From environment to environment. Depends on if you have other monitoring tools for your VMware Hyper-V space, right? Kind of keeping real-time monitoring on everything. It also depends on if you have something for reporting, right? Because it kind of meets those two needs, and if you even have a need for that. It is not necessary to purchase Veeam 1 and package it with backup and replication. Just know that we heavily discount it when we do. Veeam 1 can be extremely useful if you maybe want to dig further into it. Someone like myself would be very happy to kind of show you Veeam 1 and do a dedicated demo of that. But kind of the quick answer for that question is that it just really depends on your environment, right, if you need the Veeam 1 piece. Guys, feel free to throw any kind of last-minute questions into the question box. I think I answered all of them there. I'm seeing one more. So does Veeam support all hypervisors? So does Veeam support VMware, Hyper-V, and then they mentioned KVM. VMware, yes. Hyper-V, yes. KVM, no, but we do support Nutanix AHV as of this week, right? So we just came out that Nutanix AHV support, which we're very, very excited about as well.